He continues to receive high honors from institutions here in North Carolina and across the country for his courage and his commitment. So please give a very warm welcome to Gene Nichol.
Thank you. That is remarkably generous, Carmen. I'm very grateful. I was thinking there is this oddity. The Board of Governors closed down the Poverty Center and and you mentioned this Thomas Jefferson Award, so the faculty kind of took the opposite view, I guess. And so the one oddity in my, well, there are many oddities in my life, but one of which is the same work for which I received the Thomas Jefferson Award, which is the university's highest honor, got the Poverty Center closed down by the Board of Governors. So there's apparently a split of opinion on these efforts. I also I was thinking about Michael Hooker just coming down this afternoon, and if you ever entered into a negotiation with Michael Hooker, the chances that you were going to come his way were pretty damn good. Just let me tell you, he was wonderful. As one of the, I came here because of him, and then, as you all know, he passed away. Actually, shortly before I arrived, and so that was a heartbreak. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be a dean again. I was not signing on quickly, not agreeing to come quickly, and I told Michael when we first entered into discussions that I thought I was going to stay in Colorado, which is where I had been, and he said, well, okay, I am checking out of the hospital, and I'm going to be in Boulder tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, and you're going to have to explain to everybody in Colorado and North Carolina why you have allowed the chancellor, who everybody knows is sick, to fly all the way to Boulder, Colorado, just because you. I said, God, no, wait a minute, this is not fair. He was a great chancellor. I'm going to talk to you about poverty tonight. Not the happiest of subjects, and I know a lot of you have been doing different stuff today. I was at the Orange County Democratic Convention today, and I know some of you have been at conventions work here as well. But for tonight, I'm going to talk about poverty and talk about it not as a political matter, not as a partisan matter. I'm going to talk about it the way I work on it all the time, which is trying to describe it, its challenges, its potency. I know it's a little odd doing it here in this very nice building, and Dare County doesn't have some of the same poverty challenges that much of the rest of the state does, a little bit different than eastern North Carolina, where I spend most of my time. But it does have challenges. It has hunger challenges. It has low-income challenges as well. But most importantly, you are powerful and important members of the community of North Carolina. And poverty, people don't think about this very much. Poverty, economic challenge, economic hardship is surely North Carolina's largest problem. We don't talk about it very much. We don't talk about it like we should. But I hope to help us think at least a little bit on that front. And I know it's odd, especially in such a nice little informal group, but as we start, I am asked to say that I don't speak for the University of North Carolina. You may have heard that. I don't It doesn't seem to me necessary after all this time. As I tell people, I'm barely allowed these days to speak at the University of North Carolina, much less for the University of North Carolina. But the university I love takes great comfort when I give it every opportunity to distance itself from me. So I do that now. I've also learned something that, there are lots of other ways to learn. That is that all love affairs need not be mutual. The university that I love apparently thinks I'm something of a pain in its backside. But that hasn't diminished my affection. So I'm, like some of you, I'm Tar Heel through and through. And I remain so even if we have these tensions sometimes. Fortunately, it doesn't filter over to the campus. We gather really tonight, if you think about it. This is an astonishing time for those who work in the poverty vineyard, for those who care about poverty issues, those who lend their efforts to trying to push back at them. You know the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. These are very interesting times for those concerned with poverty. As far as I'm concerned, they're plenty interesting. I could do with a little less interesting times myself. But to put it in perspective, just to start, right now, tonight, in the richest nation on earth, the richest nation in human history, we have more poor people than at any other moment in this nation's long story. 48 million of us nationwide. That's about 15%. Nearly a quarter of all our kids, a quarter of all American kids. Almost 30% of all African American, Latinos, and Native Americans. And to put that in perspective, these are poverty numbers, but especially child poverty numbers, which are far higher than any other advanced Western democracy. We're the richest, and we think of ourselves as the most generous. But in fact, if you look at the 35 or so advanced industrial democracies, we are the wealthiest, but we have much higher poverty levels than other nations. We've also become, this wasn't true until the last decade or so, the least economically mobile of the major advanced democracies. So that if you're born poor in the United States, you're more apt to stay that way than in other developed countries. If you're born rich, the same applies. You're more apt to stay that way. And to put it one step further in perspective before we start talking about North Carolina, we are, it's maybe just barely so here, but we're in the South. We gather in the South, which is the native home of American poverty, and the way I think about it, where we have more poor people by far than the rest of the country does. And you could add editorially more political leaders who are utterly untroubled by it than the rest of the country does. 10 of the United States' poorest 12 states are southern. Though about 15% of Americans live in poverty generally. In Mississippi, it's 23%, Louisiana 22%, Arkansas 21%, Georgia 19%, South Carolina 19%, Texas 19%. We share the indignity in the South of poverty with our kids very disproportionately. Of the 10 states with child poverty rates over 25%, which would be quite high, 9 of those 10 are from the Confederate States. Of the 11 states with over 10% of children living in extreme poverty, which is an income of $11,500 a year for a family of 4. Of those 11 states, 10 of them are from the South. The Southern Educational Foundation has reported that there are 6 million children in the United States living in extreme poverty, and a disproportionate 45% of those 6 million are from the South. So the former Confederate states, of which we make a part, set the gold standard when it comes to economic deprivation. The same could be said, focusing on the South for a second, when we talk about access to health care, when we talk about income mobility. In other words, we lead the nation in the parade of horribles. Still, as I said, we're the states that are most strongly opposed to stimulus funding, or strongly opposed to health care reform, or strongly opposed to the expansion of Medicaid. We would benefit by far the most of other states, but we are the most rigidly opposed to them. So, all right, that said, that's a mouthful. It's depressing, demoralizing. It's already made you want to get up and leave. I don't blame you. Bums you out. And I don't mean to start with hard blows. So let me say this. There's a different way to look at all this stuff, a different lens. I read in the New York Times, now this is some months back, but studying a report. This is when we were more in the harder throes of the recession, but that Gucci high-end sales had risen in the last 2 years 24%. Yves Saint Laurent came close behind at 23%. Mercedes-Benz profits rose by over 30% last year. BMW more than doubled its quarterly profits. Sales of BMW's S-Class sedan, that apparently cost over $220,000 an automobile, jumped by 18% last year. Porsche's overall 6-month marker the year before improved by 59%. Saks Fifth Avenue's full-year net income rose 2 years ago 57%. Now, sadly, Neiman Marcus flatly sold out, this is 2 years ago, of something called Christian Louboutin Bianca platform pumps at $1,200 a pair. I may have pronounced that wrong. I asked my wife, and thank Jesus she didn't know how to pronounce it either. But in the same report, it indicated that Walmart had begun selling smaller packages because its shoppers didn't have enough cash on hand to buy multi-packs of toilet paper. So, now, focusing on North Carolina, what we want to talk about, what I want to talk about anyway. In North Carolina, those figures are worse. 18% of us, that's 1.75 million of our roughly 10 million, are officially poor, as designated by the federal government. And that means a family of four lives on an income of $23,000 a year or less. It is a very stingy standard. Over 1 in 4 of North Carolina children lives in poverty. Toughest figure maybe, 41% of our children are color. So the wealthiest nation on earth, this is one of the most economically vibrant states of the wealthiest nation on earth. Over 4 in 10 of our babies, our middle schoolers, our teenagers of color are constrained by the intense challenges of poverty. A simple declarative sentence that shames us as a people, it seems to me. North Carolina has, in the last decade, one of the country's fastest rising poverty rate, the country's fastest rising poverty rate. A decade ago, we were 26th, which when you think it through is just a tiny bit better than average. This year, we are 11th, speeding past the competition. 580,000 of our children in North Carolina are officially poor. School districts statewide, this was stunning to me when I first learned of it 4 years ago now and talking to teachers. But statewide school districts report 28,000 school children, enrolled school kids are homeless. 2 million of us, that's 2 of the 10 million, are classified by the federal government as hungry. Food insecure is the euphemism. That's the nation's 4th highest rate. 630,000 of our children last year didn't get enough to eat. Now, I don't know if you've heard this. It's stunning to some folks, but flatly true. Greensboro, North Carolina is the hungriest city in the United States. Highest level of hunger. Feeding America reported 2 years ago, this study's 2 years old now, that for children under 5, we have the second highest hunger rate, just a little bit behind Louisiana. Winston-Salem in 2013 was deemed America's worst city for child food hardship. Now, I pay close attention to these things, and I've got to say that I have never heard those facts mentioned by any politician in North Carolina, no matter what the political affiliation. And it makes me wonder, what does it take to become a priority? If having the most hungry kids is not enough to get you on the agenda, what is? I mean, I concede that Republicans and Democrats might have different theories for how to deal with this problem, but the notion that you could be in high leadership in a state and not think and have that state have the highest number of hungry kids, or very close to the highest number of hungry kids in the United States, and not think it's worth mentioning or setting a marker or something, saying, look, 4 years from now, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're not going to have the most hungry kids in the United States. But that's never discussed. And let me just say this, it's not because it's not brought to their attention. I have brought it to their attention many times in many ways, including hand-delivered memos, including Reverend Barber and I taking not only letters to the political folks from both parties, but even to the newscasters in our last gubernatorial race who were then going to handle the debates. I said, look, ask them about this. And we didn't hear a word. So there's a sort of conspiracy of silence on this front. A national report last year named Roanoke Rapids and Lumberton 2 of the 3 poorest cities in the United States. Robeson County has America's 3rd highest food stamp participation rate. And as my old man would say, that's a boatload of counties when you think about it. That's 3rd highest in the entire nation. And to be honest, my old man, who was sort of rough-hewn, never said boatload in his life. We have statewide last year over 9,000 homeless veterans. We are starting to make some progress on this through the auspices of the federal government. I have spent time with veterans living on the streets in Fayetteville, a huge homeless population in Fayetteville. You would think a nation could do better by its heroes. Last year, it's a year and a half ago now, I guess, a giant Harvard study, and we've been working on this some since down in Charlotte, found that Charlotte had the worst economic mobility of any city in the United States. So if you're born poor in Charlotte, well, it's studying the 50 major cities in the United States. Charlotte came in 50th out of 50. So if you're born poor in Charlotte, you are more apt to stay that way than any other city in America. That's not the way they see themselves at Charlotte. We've sort of helped to get a poverty and economic mobility task force underway down there, and I think they're looking hard at it. Even if it kind of comes from a sense of embarrassment, at least they're looking at it. Charlotte doesn't think of itself as the worst on any front. A few months after that was announced, the Census Bureau indicated that North Carolina had last year the highest increase in concentrated poverty, and that is places where lots of poor people live in the same community. Census tracts is how it's measured, where over 20% of residents are poor. We had the greatest increase in those the last 10 years of any state. Then Business Insider, which is looked at some of the data, they revealed that 4 of the 10 American cities with the sharpest increases in concentrated poverty are ours. Winston-Salem was 9th, Greensboro 6th, Charlotte 4th, and Raleigh 3rd. So we are the Super Bowl champs of exploding concentrated poverty. And if you think about it, concentrated poverty presents an additional problem over and above poverty. It is very rough to be poor. It's even rougher to be poor when everyone around you is poor and suffering the hardship which comes from it. North Carolina has more than twice as many African Americans who live in poverty as whites. The rate for African Americans is 27%, whites is 12%. The differential is even starker for kids. As I said, 41% of black kids here live below the federal poverty threshold. About 13% of white kids do. 2.5 times as many black Tar Heels are unemployed as whites. They experience much higher rates of hunger and are more frequently uninsured than whites. 3 times as many African Americans' home mortgages are underwater. Racial and income poverty disparities are intense. But poverty is measured by how much money you bring home. All right, it's an easy standard to get your arms around anyway. Wealth disparity is tougher to get a grip on. There you're not talking about what was your family's income last year, but what are your assets. But wealth disparity or wealth is crucial to buffeting yourself against the demands of recession, investing in your kids' future. We have very bad racial income and poverty disparity in North Carolina, but it is nothing like our wealth disparity. Black North Carolina households have only about 6% of the family wealth of white households. 3 times as many black families in North Carolina actually report negative worth as opposed to white ones. So that's the statistics. Bleak, beyond bleak. But even that's just data. It's just statistics, and I know it makes your head swim, and you think, oh God, how are we going to listen to this? Data can be deadly. If you want to dismiss it, it's easy to do. I deal with this a lot. So some people think, well, okay, we used to have an 11% poverty rate, now we got an 18% poverty rate. How big a deal can it be? It's a giant deal. But if you want to dismiss it, it's easy enough to do that. Because the data doesn't portray the face of what the challenges of poverty are like. So let me talk about that just a little bit. The data, it's not the same as talking through the evening, as we did a few months ago, with 1,100 Tar Heels waiting in line all night long outside the Fayetteville Civic Center, hoping to receive free dental care at 8:30 in the morning when this really remarkable medical mission opened up. Folks who had traveled great distances, many who had waited in that line for over 35 hours, usually to have teeth extracted that had long caused intense pain, because that's the kind of procedure you could get done on that short-term basis. When we interviewed folks and we asked repeatedly when they'd seen a dentist last, they would answer 10 or 20 or 30 years. Sure, it hurts a ton, but who can afford to see a dentist? Story after story of people saying, well, I got this terrible tooth. I went in to see the dentist and he said it would cost $2,200 to get it done, and I got up out of the chair and left. There's no way in the world I could pay $2,200. Still, even at that, 1,100 people waiting in line for 30 hours. Hundreds had to be turned away. And although the year before, we were able to have 11 such free clinics through unbelievable charitable work, to be honest. Last year, we could only afford 5, and I fear that there are only going to be 2 this year. The data, it's not like, this has been hard for me, though it's an absurd thing to say. But the data's not like meeting with some of the 150 or so, it moves between 120 and 180 souls who are living in the woods of Hickory, North Carolina. Y'all been to Hickory? It's otherwise sort of bucolic town. The local shelter is overburdened, so folks living in cardboard shanties and tents until the police come along and move along, shredding their tents as deterrent, which are also their only possessions. All only a few hundred yards from sprawling mansions and churchyards in a scene that Dickens wouldn't have either the gall or the imagination to invent. A young woman explaining to me through her tears that I know I've got to get used to this. I'm sorry for the blubbering, but I've never even been camping before. Or the 47-year-old woman living alone in the woods who explained unemotionally, without tears, without expectation, when you've lost your job and you lost your savings and you've lost your home, and I even lost my cat, who was very dear to me. I know that sounds stupid and funny, but when you lose everything, and I lost my cat, it hurt me very deeply. When you lose everything, you lose your own independent identity, your sense of being a person. You're, in a phrase that I couldn't forget, your own space to fill in the world. It gets hard to remember that you're still a human being, that you have a chance at a decent life, or that you deserve one, or that you are worthy of existence. And the data alone is not like talking with Clyde Fitzgerald, who I wish I could introduce you to, a retired Reynolds executive over in Winston-Salem, who runs Second Harvest Food Bank of Northwest North Carolina. Explains, by his lights, our greatest challenge is hunger. In Forsyth County, Clyde says 29,000 kids go to school in order to get something to eat, not to try and learn something. In Guilford County, he says it's 40,000. The most depressing thing I deal with, he says, is talking with a parent who describes to me the decision that she had to make about which of her two kids could eat that day and which couldn't. She said, I don't mind when I don't eat so that the kids can, but when only one of them can eat and the other can't, I can't bear it. Or when we talk to these little kids and one says, I know I'm being cranky today, I'm sorry for it, I apologize, but it's not my day to eat, and I'm cranky on the days that I don't eat. Fitzgerald's organization over there in the sort of western part of the state, I think they have 18 counties, they distribute 26 million pounds of food last year, and that's up from 7 million 5 years ago. So that is a giant increase. But Clyde concedes we could put all 26 million pounds of that food just into Greensboro alone, let alone the 18 county, just into Greensboro, and it wouldn't nearly meet the need there. Or talking with Anya Sousey, do any of y'all know her? Who runs the food bank of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City, which serves Dare County, where they've had to adjust their expectations and their aspirations the last year and a half, giving what she calls the towering hunger in this region. Our goal is to reach about half of the people in need in our service area. Communities here just don't have the jobs that can pay a wage to support a family on. People assume that the area, because of the beaches, has a lot of wealth, and it does, but most everyone here works in the service industry. Wages weren't that good in the first place, and then when the tourist season ends, the food bank and the food pantries explode. We'd like to set the bar higher, hoping to reach half of the people, but that wouldn't be realistic. It's not possible financially, she says. And she says we're only putting a Band-Aid on an open wound. The data is not like have you ever heard of crisis assistance ministries? Yeah, okay. Going down to crisis assistance ministries, this is a social services agency in Charlotte. I like to go down there about 5 o'clock in the morning in the dark. It's just at the edge of Uptown, which I don't know why they call it. Y'all explain that to me. Uptown, it seemed like downtown to me, but Uptown. Yeah, I know. There you go. So there'll be about 200 to 300 people in line, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning. The offices will open up at 8. Frankly, it's a frustration to the folks at Crisis Assistance Ministry that people insist on coming at 4 o'clock in the morning because it doesn't change the calculus. It's just at the edge of Uptown Charlotte. It's sort of in the shadow of the banking towers. The kind of, if I was being more pejorative, I'd say the bailed out banking towers. And these folks are conscious not to have been bailed out. They're also very conscious that just over the highway, there are folks living in the woods, and they're terrified that their kids are going to suffer that same fate. People who we interviewed, we've had the honor to interview a group of folks from Crisis Assistance Ministries for a year and a half. And if you got people who tell you that low-income people don't work hard, aren't resourceful, ain't strong, I would have jumped off a bridge before I'd have been able to match any of what these women do. They say over and over again that they're grateful for the help that they get from Crisis Assistance Ministry, which is an unbelievable place. They're grateful for food stamps, which keeps sometimes their kids from starving. But what they really wish is that they could be paid a fair wage. They say, look, I work more than 40 hours a week. I work 2 jobs frequently, but I make $8, $8.25. The people I work for, I've worked here for 7 years. They know that you cannot pay for your rent and your electricity and your transportation and your child care in Charlotte, North Carolina on $8.50 an hour. They know I'm a good employee. They know I try to do my best by them. And yet they pay me wages that they know leave me at the edge of hunger and homelessness. And they say, why is that okay? Why is that thought fair and decent? Just because you can get away with it. Or they'll say, I don't want to be pejorative, but they'll say these people go to these big churches, and they're bastions of the community. Why is it thought to be Christian to pay a wage like that just because you know you can get away with it? And I didn't have, you guys maybe have better answers. I didn't have a good answer. The data's not like going up the road here a little bit, meeting with healthcare workers in Rocky Mount who explain how they bend the rules to place oxygen in the homes of their impoverished and incapacitated patients, because that makes it harder under state law to turn off the water and the power, which it does, that their patients frequently can't afford. It's not like meeting with the remarkable 70-year-old black woman from Winton who drives a school bus every day, morning and afternoon, making me fear for the traffic patterns in Winton, whatever they are, so that she can get the resources that she needs to pay for the medicine and the therapy that her physically disabled husband required. You know her. I hear about her all the time down in Raleigh. I don't want to editorialize, but she's one of North Carolina's lazy poor people, driving that bus at 70 years old. The data's not like dealing with the brilliant young black mother from Halifax County who I loved, who graduated from UNC, moved back home, had a good job but lost it in a closing, eventually lost her housing and her sense of hope. But when she met with us, she explained, sort of through tears, that she feared she was losing the far more important battle with her 8-year-old son about, against peer pressure, whether it's worth going to school or not. Because he said to her, how can you prove that, Mom, by what's happened to you? Or the daughter in Wilson, who frets for her 62-year-old father with heart disease, who couldn't get in to see a doctor unless he could come up with the $400 that he owed and had no prospects for. So she described fearing every day the call, and we sort of struggle with, I don't know who's got the greater burden here, the dad or the daughter. or the 30-year-old woman from Coleraine who had lost her husband and her aunt and her house in these tornadoes that we had, 3.5 years ago? And since she didn't have any insurance, she has, since that time, not only lived in financial but personal ruin. Or having conversations with the hundreds of Latino women and men working long, brutal hours in agriculture across eastern North Carolina. Again, not that far from here. Not that far from where I live. For $45 a day, except on the many days that they receive nothing because their employers decide to steal their wages. And their employers will say, if you're getting them candidly off the record, it's just part of the business plan. It just helps with the profit margin. Or spending time in East Spencer. You guys remember East Spencer, right? Just up north of Charlotte a little bit, mostly black town where over 40% of the whole community lives in poverty. East Spencer has no library, no school, no grocery store, in what the scholars call a food desert, even though the national corporate headquarters of the massive Food Lion grocery chain is located about, I counted maybe 750 yards over the bridge in Salisbury. And there's this huge, now it's not Food Lion, it's Aldi, is that what that thing is? The huge food distribution center located smack in the middle of East Spencer, which sends these massively loaded trucks out all over the South, everywhere except in the community where they live. You can buy food in one place, this little corner convenience store in East Spencer, and you can buy what my grandmother used to call a can of Vienna sausages for about $4.50 if you can afford to pay for it. So a food desert in real sense. And you don't think about it, but you got no transportation, you got no bus line. If there's no grocery store in your community, it makes a big difference. Or going out to Hendersonville, where in a police chase for an unarmed black man alleged to have stolen a computer game, over 50 bullets were fired by law enforcement officers into half a dozen houses, including the church where we met 2 days later. A grandmother explaining, weeping, that if she and her 4-year-old granddaughter hadn't hit the floor quick enough, shots coming through the window would have killed them both. This is 50 shots chasing an unarmed black man alleged to have stolen a game. Shots coming through the window would have killed them both. Something that we got to be candid to admit would never happen in a white neighborhood. Never. No possibility. So that a young mother would say to us, when they shot into all those houses, they wounded the whole community, even though they didn't hit anybody, because they said our lives didn't matter. And how else could it be understood? So, snapshots. And all this, of course, occurs in a state and in a country where, if you look at the data, most of our leaders believe that we have so much poverty because we are too generous with welfare benefits. But the United States, as I said, treats its poor more harshly, markedly more harshly, than other advanced countries do. So if being tough on poor people reduces poverty, then we ought to have the fewest poor instead of the most. What we have become, whether we meant to or not, is the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal nation in the world. At least major nation in the world. I don't know what they do in Saudi Arabia. I hadn't measured it and I don't give a damn. Among the major nations, the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal. Despite all our protestations, I'm guessing in Saudi Arabia they don't pledge liberty and justice for all. I don't know what they pledge. And all this occurs as well in a state today that, without getting political about it, has in the last 4 years enacted an array of policies that, at least it has to be said, make things more challenging for poor people. Kicking 500,000 people off of Medicaid even though the feds would pay for over 90% of it. Ushering in the largest cut to an unemployment compensation program in American history, largest ever since we started them in the 30s. Ending the earned income tax credit, which means you actually raise the income taxes of working families making about $35,000 a year. That's 959,000 North Carolinians. We abolished the state appropriation for legal aid. Looking at those hunger statistics that I told you, we cut back on food stamp eligibility, kicked 100,000 people off of food stamps. We cut the meager state allocation to food banks in half. We ended the appropriation to legal aid, announced an array of regressive sales taxes in order to lower income taxes. And we essentially have done all this to reduce the income taxes of the wealthiest North Carolinians, though they already claim a larger share of North Carolina's wealth than has occurred in over 100 years. So, the frank truth is, in my view, that if the exclusions and the indignities of North Carolina poverty, American poverty, are right, then our Constitution is wrong. If the debilitations of those locked at the bottom are acceptable, then our scriptures are wrong. And if these denials of equal citizenship and humanity are permissible, it seems to me we pledge allegiance to a cynical illusion, not to a foundational creed. And I think we know it. It's like Lyndon Johnson once said, we may not know everything, but we know the difference between chicken shit and chicken salad. Johnson wasn't always crude. He was just almost always crude. I spent a lot of my youth protesting Lyndon Johnson. Some of you probably did too. He horrified in war. He was this big, complicated, inconsistent, hypocritical, larger-than-life Texan. I grew up in Mesquite, Texas myself. Johnson would holler at you, wave his arms, sweat on you, spit at you. I don't know why I'm drawn to him. But he also taught that American poverty touches both our personal conscience and our national mission. Under circumstances not enough unlike our own, he said this, and I'll stop. Rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of America itself. Rarely are we met with the challenge not to our growth or our abundance or our security, but rather to the values and purposes and meaning of our beloved nation. And should we defeat every enemy, and should we double our wealth and conquer the stars and be unequal to this task, then we would have failed as a people and as a nation. For with a country as with a person, Johnson said, what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? For what does a man profit? That outlines our work. So I'll stop there and we can do questions if you want. Sorry I don't have better news to bring, or a better way to do it, but I'm glad you'd come out and spend some time talking about it tonight. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say my sister called me from New York 2 weeks ago and said she's a social worker friend who's working in North Carolina, and she started telling me all about poverty, and I was like stunned.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no idea.
Yeah. I know. But I was mentioning, we've been working with these folks down in Charlotte, Crisis Assistance Ministries, and there's a young woman from AmeriCorps there and from Vista. And she was telling me that she had been to the dentist 2 days before, and he said, what do you do? And she said, well, I work for Vista. And he said, the poverty agency? And said, yeah. She said, he said, well, what are you doing in Charlotte? He said, I've lived in Charlotte all my life. If there's any poverty, I'd know it. I would have seen it. And she said, maybe not. The Clyde Fitzgerald, who I mentioned, who runs the food banks out in the West, or it's really the central and western part, he says, he's like a reformed smoker, because he was, for his whole working career, he was a high executive at Reynolds Tobacco. And then he went on the board of the food bank, and he started realizing the depth of these challenges, and then he became obsessed, and now he's the director of the food bank. And he says, I'll say to my old acquaintances and everything, they'll talk about this work, and they'll say, there's no poverty in Winston-Salem. There's no hunger in Winston-Salem or in Greensboro. And one thing that is back of that, they would say this at Crisis Ministries too, we sort of think, when we think of hunger, for example, we think of the pictures of those kids on TV who are in Africa. And they think, if you don't see that, then we ain't got any hunger. Well, there's massive hunger, massive challenges of hunger, even when people aren't looking like those kids. And Clyde would say, so I started saying to my friends, when they would tell me there's no hunger like that in Winston-Salem, he said, well, okay, you got 20 minutes? Get in my car. I'll show it to you. Let's go. And he said, the one thing that has never happened, they have never taken me up on that. So there's a little bit of a desire. I mean, poverty is a reason I talk about, I like to talk about the challenges that we have, the solutions that maybe we should try to do, the steps we should take. But I spend a lot of time, and it can be frustrating to people, talking about the facts or the sort of painting a picture of poverty. People in the legislature, they do not want us painting pictures of poverty. They don't like that. And a big part of the reason for that, I think, is a lot of poverty is invisible to us. And boy, certainly invisible to a lot of folks here. I live in Chapel Hill, invisible to a lot of folks there. Some of it is just circumstantial, I guess. When I was younger, I worked with a wonderful senator named Paul Wellstone from Minnesota. And Paul used to say, the biggest challenge that we have, or one of our worst transgressions, is that we turn our gaze away from those locked at the bottom. And I think what he meant by that is, okay, our kids are doing well, maybe, and their friends, maybe they're not doing quite as well as they were 5 years ago, but they're basically doing well. Maybe there's poverty, maybe there's intense poverty. Maybe it's even so intense that it kind of puts the lie to some of the claims of equal dignity and opportunity and an equal chance that we talk about. But it's on the other side of the tracks, or the other side of the county, or the other side of the state, and we don't see it. And what Paul would say is, the way we deal with it is we turn our gaze away. And I always kind of like it. It's like there are these challenges, they're over here. Let's just look this way. Then we look this way, we can still say, I find this funny. I've been in the academy my whole life. I think there are three kind of realities that come together in dealing with American poverty, North Carolina poverty. Almost uniformly, Americans believe these three things to be true, at least when you instruct them a little bit. This is the richest nation on earth, which it is. We have the highest levels of poverty of any advanced nation. People don't believe that, but they sort of believe it after you demonstrate it to them. Americans also believe a third thing, which is that this is the fairest, most equal opportunity-based, most egalitarian country on the face of the earth. I try to measure these things by my old man, who was a sort of rough, unschooled Texan. And, if you try to convince him that this wasn't the best, it actually is harder to be a poor kid here than in other countries. He'd hit you in the mouth, is what he would do. But here's my point. Americans sort of believe this is the richest, the poorest, and the fairest country. Now, you got to convince them that it's the poorest. But what I'm saying is, I've been around the academy my whole life. You can square a whole lot of things, but you can't be the richest, the poorest, and the fairest all at once. We deal with the notion of the fairest. I think what Paul would say is, the way we do that is, okay, there's all this poverty, we look over here. And if we just look over here, we don't pay attention to the poverty over here, we turn our gaze away, then we can still say happily, this is the richest and the fairest country in the world. We just have to turn our gaze away from the challenges which exist and are so pronounced in North Carolina that you have to intentionally turn your gaze away. Those the women we've been interviewing down in Charlotte, they say, oh, you know, don't tell me these people don't know that. He said, I go to work every day. I go to work every day in Charlotte. There's all kinds of people living on the benches, sleeping out under the benches. They don't see them. Am I the only one who sees them? You know, you gotta. A lot of times we don't see things that we want to make sure we don't see. And I think that's become more pronounced in recent decades. Yes, sir.
What factor do the churches play in the totality?
They're very important, and let me say this, they have a very powerful mixed record. This is, I spent a lot of time in the last 7 or 8 years out in communities in North Carolina. Most of my time I spent in eastern North Carolina, so I'm out in the field all the time. And I've had this will be a kind of longish answer, but I think it's a very important question. This has been my set of conclusions from working hard on poverty issues for 10 years, the last 10 years in North Carolina. The first one is this. Our level, and this won't surprise you after tonight, the level of hardship that people experience is much more intense than people think. The deprivation is much, much more pronounced than almost all of us anticipate. That's one. Here's number 2, related to your question. There are people in every county in North Carolina who do such remarkable work, charitable work, pushing back against the challenges that their brothers and sisters face, that it is hard to describe how generous some of your sisters and brothers are. It's hard to believe how selfless people are. And this is particularly true. Now, I've lived an odd life. Carmen mentioned this. I mean, I come from the wrong side of the tracks, but I've also been I was a law school dean for a long time at very strong law schools. I was a university president for a while, so I know rich people too. And I like rich people, that's just fine. And you would believe, if you believe the lore, that the real generosity comes from rich people. That turns out not to be true. What has stunned me more than anything is what poor people will do for one another. People who do not have 2 dimes to rub together. Who will, I could tell you 10 stories tonight that would restore your faith in humanity, but also make you cry. So, the way I put it, Mother Teresa would not be lonely in North Carolina. There is great, remarkable, unbelievable work, especially work done by poor people in poor communities, especially black people in poor communities. So that's number 2. There's astonishing work happening all over North Carolina. Here's number 3. Every one of those persons doing that work would say that there is no way you can make up the gulf between what is needed and what they're able to do. They wouldn't put it this way, but Augustine would say that charity cannot make up for a want of justice. 4th, and then every one of those same people would say, and the gap is getting worse, not better. So that's true of religious organizations. Some religious organizations, particularly tiny ones. I've been working with this group of, it's called the Open Door Homeless Ministry, Open Door Baptist Church in Conover, North Carolina. There are like 12 people in this little church who minister to the people living in the woods. That's how I've met with and come to know the people living in the woods in Hickory. These 12 people minister to those folks trying to keep them alive. And it's tough work. I've been down there 10 times. Dead of summer, dead of winter, trying to keep folks alive. I tell the folks at this little open door Baptist church that, I grew up Catholic. I tell them, I'm happy to spend time with y'all 6.5 days a week. There's no way I'd come in your doors on Sunday morning. I don't know what you people talk about in here. But the work they do, I can't believe it. That's true of and a lot of the remarkable work that is done is driven by people who have religious motivations. There is no doubt about that. It is also true that there are immensely wealthy, big churches who do almost nothing. In Hickory, this little church I was talking about, now it has maybe 100 people, and 12 of them are spending almost full time working on this ministry. They had a budget of $10,000 a year, maybe. We've helped them raise most of that. But there are some big churches in Hickory that these homeless folks live only a few hundred yards from. Those Hickory churches, typical of large organized churches, they will send their kids to Haiti on missions. And they've tried to say, why don't you help us work in the woods? 600 yards. You don't have to go very far, 600 yards. And they won't do that. And I understand it. I mean, poverty at home is much more wrenching than poverty that you can drop in on and then leave. Then they made a second proposal to the big churches in Hickory. Would you give us 10% of your landscaping budget to help support this ministry? And they rejected that. And I think they might have thought, and they made people, you're trying to shame us now. The story for religious organizations is very mixed. Some do unbelievable work. Lots and lots do almost nothing. And lots do things around the world that they won't do here for odd and complicated reasons.
Can you give examples of what that little church does and how they minister to
for one thing, there are probably right now, tonight, things are better now because it's not quite as cold, right? I was down there in November when it starts. When you can tell when you ride around with these folks, I was driving down there on a November morning. It started snowing, and you could tell the temperature was dropping, and you could tell the folks from Indigo Ministries, they started getting nervous because there is a chance people are going to die, So they know where a lot of people are. They look for others. They bring them these little stoves for cooking and for heat. They bring them blankets. They bring them some food. Some they bring medicine. Of course, there's some pregnant women in the woods there, so they try to get them to the doctor. There are some kids living under the bridges in Florida, but they're very hard to find because parents worry that they're going to get the kids taken away from them if they're seen. Now, the Fayetteville police have told me that actually it's not true. They thought it was. There's a wonderful woman, a former Marine, who is the Fayetteville cops liaison to the homeless community. She's tough as she can be, and just a great soul. She said, I figured at first that if you had your kids, we'd take them away for abuse of neglect, but no, they don't. They said there are too many. But they hide. They bring them water. One of the groups, there's some controversy about this, you can imagine. He also lets them have some cigarettes, gives them a couple cigarettes. And then, now, the way things are, then some people quit giving them money because they said, okay, you're giving people 3 cigarettes. He's trying to keep contact with them. They give, I didn't think about this, they sometimes give dog food because sometimes the people have pets and they can't have, they don't have resources to deal with that. So they do the kind of things that you would think, but the goal is to keep them from dying. And then they also, there's a grace center there, so they try to bring them in, have rehab, have job training, have computer access, and the like. So it's yeoman's work. It's remarkable work on a budget of $8,000 a year. Let me tell you one other story. It's religious, okay? There's a guy named Tony Rice in Elizabeth City. A big black guy. He's almost my size. He was a paratrooper when he was littler. He was a North Carolina prison. He worked with the Bureau of Prisons. And it was a cop. And then so he retired and he moved back to Elizabeth City, which was his home. But I mean, he was only 45 or something back. He had these pensions and stuff. So he opened up a little car lot. Was going to try and make ends meet that way, and learned that the cops came to him and said, we got some homeless people here who are spending the night sometimes in cars in your lot, so we wanted to get your permission to prosecute. He said, I got it. He's very religious. He's a part-time minister. He said, no, I don't do that. Let me talk to him. And so he got to know a couple folks, brought them clothes, brought them food. They tended to live in vacant buildings there in Elizabeth City. Went searching for one of his newfound friends when it got real cold. Didn't see him for 3 days. Looked all through everywhere. Tony's a big guy. Wasn't going to rest easy. He says, I read, what is it, Matthew 25? What are you doing for the least of these? And so he found him. He pushed the door open. The guy died. He was stiff. And Tony said he had an epiphany. And he said, I don't feel like I can be a decent man and not do anything about this. I felt sorry for his wife. They had a house. Tony said, look, we got a house. They had a rental house. They said, can't we turn that into a shelter? But she's a great woman and she did it. So they have, there's no men's shelter in Elizabeth City. They have 9 folks who live there. And what Tony said was, I can't do much, but I can keep 9 people from freezing to death. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't anymore do that to the man in the moon. I wouldn't bring 9 people into my house. I wish I would. I wish I was as great a soul as he is, but I'm not. And he can't get much help from the bigger churches in Elizabeth City. We went and had some discussions with City Council because they could get some money to expand. But, and I don't want to disparage anybody, but the City Council in Elizabeth City said, we don't want to have a shelter. That's going to mean more homeless people coming here. He said, they're here. There are 170 homeless people here in Elizabeth City. Well, we'll just get more of them. So we can't do that. That's not the image that we're trying to portray. So there are people doing work that just don't do it. The way I try to explain to people when I'm talking to folks down in the City House is I know a lot of people think, people like me think this is a question of justice. And public as well as private institutions need to work hard to address it, and our public policies need to address it. A lot of people disagree with that. Certainly a lot of folks running our government disagree with that, and they think that This is just a matter for the private sector and for churches and for nonprofits. What I try to say to them, I point to somebody like Tony or somebody like these folks down at Open Door Homeless Ministry. Whether you think there's a public obligation or a private one, we're falling short on both. So even people who spend their whole lives, like Tony Rice, doing this, can't get enough resources to keep the electricity on. He's had to turn the electricity off before. So it seems to me, regardless of what one's philosophical perspective is, we got a lot of work to do. Tom?
Quickly, first of all, I really appreciate everything you've stated and given us some great information. On two levels, from the standpoint of whether if you're on the county commission in Dare County or whether you're in the North Carolina Senate or the North Carolina House, what one thing do you think from a political government function should be pursued to try to help resolve some of these problems? That's the first question. And the second one, outside of the government itself, how would you suggest that any group, individual, or any local church, or any other group here in Dare County should try to approach, and what would be the best way to help, not to solve it, because once you said you can't solve it overnight, but what can be done to help? Because I think I enjoyed what you said, because as you've done it unto the least of these, you have done it unto Jesus Christ. And that's the bottom line of what we all want to be concerned with. So can you make a quick reference to those two?
I will, and I'm glad to have that question. Let me say first on the questions of policy. Right? If I was in the State House, I would do a lot more than this, but here's where I'd start. And this comes, well, I kind of had this view anyway, but this comes from a year and a half of conversations with low-income folks in Charlotte who are working 50 hours a week, trying against the odds to keep their kids out of homelessness, living in concentrated poverty in Charlotte. The first thing I would do is, and it's horrifying what we've just done, HB2 is horrifying in any of 1,000 ways. But to add to it, that you're going to step in and say, we want to preemptively make it illegal to raise the minimum wage and sneak that in is, you know, I don't know what to say about people who work hard, given the state of poverty and income inequality, and we have a massive wage structure problem in North Carolina. About 50% of the new jobs being created in Charlotte, where we've studied this a lot, lots of new jobs. It's great. I mean, we have had something of an economic recovery. Despite what you hear, the economic recovery tracks job for job the national recovery standards. So I've got a chart I could give you of the unemployment rate in North Carolina and the unemployment rate in the United States the last 25 years. It tracks perfectly the federal rate. So we've had a reduction of unemployment in North Carolina because of these national trends. That's fine. But you look at those trends, we have all this poverty, we have all this concentrated poverty, and about, last year in Charlotte, 30% of full-time workers made under $23,500 a year. 50% of full-time workers made what's considered low wage, that is below a living wage standard, which would be like $30,000 a year. So a lot of jobs, but manufacturing jobs, what depleted Hickory, manufacturing jobs going, they've been replaced by folks working in food service. You see a lot of them here, working in restaurants. Lots of people, a lot of these women work in home health care or healthcare facilities. Hard work. Work that's like the most important work you can think of. It's your mother, take care of your mother. But they're making $9 an hour. So we have this massive structural problem of what's called wage stratification. So like in Charlotte, 84% of the new jobs are either low wage, close to poverty jobs, or high wage jobs. I mean, Charlotte also has far and away the highest percent of jobs where people make over $100,000 a year. What's lost is the middle. And so you look at that and you'd say, I'm going to dedicate all my effort to try and stop the minimum wage from being increased. I don't know what to say to a person like that. And what all these folks down there would say is, what I'd rather have more than anything is a decent wage. I'd rather make, if I could make $12 an hour, I wouldn't need food stamps, I wouldn't need a bus pass. I don't want them. I don't like having to go from place to place. I don't like being on food stamps. I work hard. So first, I wish we'd raise the minimum wage. Second, a lot of these folks, and this is, I cast this for those, like most of us, who believe in the Word, all right? Some of these women have, in the last 3 years, lost their subsidy for child care because the legislature cut the hire. It was already way too small, so that we had real long wait lists most people can't get to, but we cut it in half. All right? Now, if you believe people ought to work, let's give them a decent wage. I mean, let's raise the minimum wage. Let's give a subsidy for their child care so that they can work. And then third, God, let these people have access to health care. The notion that we are,
Oh, amen.
Yes.
I was telling Carmen this, we've been interviewing doctors about their patients who can't get health care coverage because we won't expand Medicaid. I was mentioning this. When I first started this, I've been mad about this, I must admit, for years. Because I've talked to a lot of these folks, I've debated a lot of them, and if you can't come up with a reason that you're voting against expanding and putting 500,000 people on Medicaid that the federal government's paying for, and 1,000 people are going to die, and you can't think of a reason that you're doing that, somebody needs to shake you a little bit, if you ask me. And I've found any of them have been able to give a reason. I mean, it doesn't do any good to say, well, it's just a common sense decision. What the hell does common sense mean? It's starting to make me think common sense is some kind of elusive term that I fail to understand. But I thought initially, it means you can't get the surgical procedure that you need, or you can't get it till it's too late and it costs more, and all that's true. But what the doctors talk about even more than that, I was saying to Carlos, the people who, for very small dollars, you can make massively different outcomes in their lives. The people who can't get blood pressure medicine, who can't get diabetes, insulin, who they're not going to get cancer screenings, and they're going to die, or they're going to be treated in emergency rooms eventually in ways that are going to cost us 10 times what they would have cost otherwise. So those would be my first three. But I'd say, raise the minimum wage, let's pay a decent wage. The governor said back when he was mayor of Charlotte that a minimum wage is socialist. A minimum wage, we've got a minimum wage, all right? It's just about the lowest in the world. So it's not a question of whether you have a minimum wage, we think the only way we can compete is if we have a lower minimum wage than everybody else. What kind of confidence is that as a people? That's what I would do. Now, on the home front, this is true in every, I spend a lot of time out and about, and in every community in North Carolina. Like you said, Fountain, you're not going to fix it, but there are thousands of things that can be done. There is work through churches here. What I would do, if you're just looking for a first start, is go to Food Bank of the Albemarle, which serves this. Is that you?
No, I'm from the beach food pantry.
Ah, okay.
So-
Okay, beach, all right, here we go. You explain. But, so, I mean, having talked to the food bank folks, this is a massive question here, and that's resources and dollars and volunteers. And you're not going to fix everything, but a lot of good-hearted folks are trying to do something, and it's lighting a candle instead of cursing the darkness, and now you're going to tell them what they can do.
I'm very pleased to be here and to hear you talking about hunger, and a lot of you are already aware, and I can hear your nods and your concurrence with the way that our population here during the winter when they're not unemployed. And we serve on average 4,100 people a year. 15% of our community is food insecure. And we're looking to reach more people. So I would really like you to contact me if you have ideas for how we can reach more people. We know they're there. Our board wants to do that. And I want to invite you all. We're having our first open house at our new facility next Friday from 9 to noon, and next Saturday from 10 to 3. We were able to purchase a building last year due in large part to the Outgrants Community Foundation. So,
And where's that?
Yeah.
we're at Milepost 4 in Kitty Hawk.
Let me add something. This relates to something we've talked about both with regard to this and the solutions and kind of the problems. We did a lot of work last year down in Brunswick County. So I'm thinking about Dare County here with different kinds of challenges. In Brunswick County, it's one of the fastest growing counties in the United States. Y'all know what Brunswick County is, right? So, but it's a split county. It's got, if you're on the east side of, 17? Then massive growth, very high dollar developments and the like. If you're on the west side of 17, there's a lot of largely historically African-American cities, ancient historic cities. And some of the most wrenching that I read of is, we've been working with a community down there called Royal Oak, and their great-great-grandfolks were run out of Wilmington in the massacre.
Yes.
And they've been living in these small communities across the bridge in Brunswick County ever since. All right, so there's this little place called Royal Oak, separately incorporated. And Brunswick County gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and they got a big county commission, and they're wonderful people and everything like that. They did what happens in the United States. This happened in Orange County. I know. I learned about it first in Brunswick County, and then I found that it was going on in my own county. So it's not uncommon. But first they put the dump there in this historically black community, and then they put the dog shelter there, and then they put the toxic waste thing there. As some of the community activists said, every shitty thing gets put in that one place. Now, these are folk who have been living there, and they're living on the home place. Their family's been living there for 75 years. And now, all of a sudden, your house is next to this giant waste facility. And your little house, your little middle-class house that used to be worth $90,000 is now worth $20,000. And why is it when you think about this? Well, because this little community is subsidizing all this wealthy growth over here on the other side of Brunswick County. Their houses are dropping in value, and they're getting sick, and they're getting cancer, so that they can handle the waste from the construction. Now, it gets even worse. Okay, they don't have water. Of course, the county won't send water, so they have to use wells and the like. The county said we can't afford water. But then they moved the dog pound, the animal shelter, over in the middle of Royal Oak, and they had to string water to the dog shelter, right? But they said, we still can't. So we're going to go through your yard, string the water. We're not going to let you. Now, I bring this all up for this reason. We've been doing a lot of work, and we had, with the Civil Rights Center at UNC, we got some pretty good results.
Inverse condemnation sounds to me.
Well, we got the expansion of the solid waste facility blocked, and my colleagues at the Civil Rights Center did the bulk of it, and so some good success has come down there. It's not terrific, but so I work a lot with NAACP, and the NAACP had asked me to come down there and talk to their banquet. It was a big banquet, they got a lot of folk, and so I did this, and I spent all my time talking about Royal Oak. Now, here's why I mention this. Those folks at that banquet in Brunswick County, the NAACP, were unaware of what was happening in Royal Oak. And a lot of them were people of color. And they said, oh, Christ, I moved down here to have a big, nice house. I want to live on the beach too. I damn sure didn't know that we're causing this kind of hardship. And I think that's frequently the case. You don't know about the hardship next door, and it's a little worse or harder when you stop to realize, oh, in this case, I'm causing it. And oddly, if you think it through, the fact that those folks are having to subsidize, which is what they're doing, these wealthier folks is almost takes your breath away. Now, I got in some arguments with some of the county commissioner folks down there, and this was just to kind of make the point. We're all in this boat. They say, rightly, I think they mean this well, we didn't put the dog shelter there and the solid waste facility there and the groundwater treatment there because there were black people there. We put it because it was cheap. And I said, yeah, okay, well, that may be right. I said, you know, people say it's not the race. I say, I don't know. But let's say maybe you're right. So what you're saying is, we're not shitting on them because they're black. We're sitting on them because they're poor.
They have a voice.
And I said, well, you know, if that seems a lot better to you, more power to you. But, you know, in a way, that's almost just kind of the way our system works. I mean, you can, now I think, to be honest, I think these county commissioners have got brutal folk. I'll be honest. But I can imagine someone who's not being brutal and just saying, okay, I've got to put the solid waste facility somewhere, find the cheapest place to put it. And this stuff over in Royal Oak's getting cheaper every week because we keep putting more crack over there. And the more we put, the cheaper things are. So I bet you got stuff you could look around here, even in Dare County.
Oh, yes.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yes, sir.
Gene, can I,
Yeah.
it's no different than what they did in East Lake. I mean, they put the landfill out there for all the waste, you know, and they couldn't do anything about it. So
Okay.
we did stop them doing the sewage thing over there, but yeah, stop it.
Go ahead. Yes.
First, I'm so happy that you came out today, Mr. Nichols, and thank you. And there are a lot of impoverished people here. I see them every single day. And I'm like the other young lady that said, why doesn't anybody else see them? Because I see them. They live next to my office, behind the library. If you want to see them in the wintertime, go in the library. After 20 minutes, they send them away from being on the computer. They're in there to be warm. Go to Kmart. There's a young man that sleeps 4 feet from my car, and every year we got together and we gave him one of those overall things. Mm-hmm. And all I can say, every time I see him every year, I cry because the Lord kept him. I see him every year. Now this year when I've seen him, he looks worse than he ever has. And they don't want to be acknowledged. this is one thing that happened that hurt me tremendously. I went up to him in Kmart to give him some money, and he said, "I'm invisible." And I said, "I see you." And he goes, "Get away from me." And I went back to work and shared it with I was crushed because I see you, I am your keeper. And our little children, some of them even in my church, that dance and do different things. And I said, "Oh my God, I can't wait to see you dance. Aren't you excited that we're celebrating you today?" Guess what she said? "I just want to see what we're eating." I was crushed by that. And I will say that our community is doing big things. I'm blessed to be employed with the county and part of the Dare to Care committee. We support 14 nonprofit organizations. The food pantry does wonderful things. Friends of Youth does wonderful things. But our churches, but I'm telling you, they're here. We have to, if one of us acknowledges one person, we can help another person. And I always say, where's their family? Do you not know? I have a son. I have cousins. I have nieces. Do you not wonder where they are? They're out there. And I hate the winter because I always tell my mother, now it's cold.
The cold part. I feel differently when it gets cold now than I did.
Yes.
And this notion that it's everywhere and it's invisible, and I'm going to get you in just a second. We did a poverty tour maybe 3 years ago. The Poverty Center and Reverend Barber and NAACP. It got a lot of publicity and helped to raise visibility a little bit, but it was snapshot stuff, by definition. We went on 5 different legs. One of the groups that we went with is Dr. Jarvis Hall's civic engagement organization at NC Central. And they're the other outfit that got closed by the Board of Governors last year just for being friends with us and Reverend Barber, I think. But we had been to Fayetteville, and we've been to Hickory. So our last stop of the day, we were going back to Durham on the way home, and we stopped in the woods at one corner of Durham, not real far from the American Tobacco campus over there. We met with a bunch of homeless people living in the woods there. And Jarvis, a great soul, said, "Christ, I live 3 blocks from here. I drive by this every day. I didn't know it was there." So he said, feel like a guy, I feel like a schmuck. When I was in the middle of studying what they're doing down in Brunswick County, it was very embarrassing to learn that we had done virtually the same thing as the Roger Road community in Orange County. So we've all got our stories to tell. Yes, ma'am, you had your hand up to walk that.
Yeah, what you're saying, pretty much, I agree with 100%. And the truth about the mission, the issue that I have with all the charitable organizations that have come up in the last 10 years is that those organizations are used as the excuse for not doing anything in terms of social responsibility in the government. So they will point, a lot of the Republicans will point to these organizations and say, well, that's a church thing to do, or that's the health of the poor, that's the church prerogative, it has nothing to do with us. And that's why they feel free to cut all these programs out. And the other thing that I see is that, when we watch the election and, Trump gets up there and talks about manufacturing and bringing jobs back and making America great again, the issue is that the jobs are never going to come back. The level at which we've developed technology has eliminated so many jobs. And so it is going to be, there's 2 things going on in our economy. One is the technology, and that's well advanced, and that's always funded by somebody. And then there's the service, and that's where we are. We're cleaning each other's butts, literally, and doing those things, and then, but we have put it on a level where that is not a good thing to do. That's not a good job. So that's why we're never going to get it to $15 an hour at the rate we're going.
Right.
Because we don't acknowledge that that is work that has value.
We've been involved in these discussions down in Charlotte on this very question, and been meeting with the commission has asked us to meet with them and document these questions. And what I just tried to add a little bit, just exactly on the last point you made, you've got this explosion of jobs, service jobs, which are making, at the very least, low-wage jobs. They're at the edge of poverty jobs. And what I tried to say to them, they're in Charlotte. I hope you'll realize that this, I said, now we work in a lot of different communities in North Carolina. I said, I feel like this is a little different issue in Charlotte. We're working in Goldsboro all the time right now. And Goldsboro has got a real challenge to get some economic juices flowing, period. All right? We're working in Roper, not that far from here, a tiny little town. It is a hellish task to get economic juices flowing. We're doing some work over out of Watauga County, some of the same kinds of questions. I said, but that's not true here. You got economic power out the wazoo. You got more jobs making over $100,000 a year than anybody at a higher rate by far. And those folks that you're talking about are serving you. I said, this is one of the rhetorical points that I think is it looks to us that our work is inaccurate. We sort of constantly make the claim, you got to keep these low-wage jobs or they're going to go off to India, something like that. Those jobs can't go anywhere. You're not going to, the person taking care of your grandmother, they can't do that from India. The person serving your meal at the restaurant or mowing your yard. So I said, it's a little bit different ethical question, isn't it? When you're saying, okay, we got all these high-end jobs, and we need to have these industries to serve those people, and then we make the judgment that those industries have to work for $8 an hour.
Have no value.
So that's a value judgment. I said, I don't know, in Roper, they may not be able to make that calculation. But I said, here, you've got the money, you've got the resources, you've decided we're going to leave you at this kind of serf status. And you know, when they explain it to those folks who work at Crisis Assistance Ministries, they say, well, we've got an obligation to our shareholders. And these women say, hell, I've been working here 8 years. Do you have any obligation to me at all? I work with you. Why is it thought acceptable to say, I only get $8.25 an hour? You know I'm starving to death. Why do you think that's admirable? Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
There's another issue that came up a while ago that happened to be in BB&T Bank and picked up this magazine of theirs, and I was surprised at the story they published concerning the unions. And, you know, I jokingly tell everyone, and it's not a joke, I'm being facetious, that the difference between the North and the South is that the North has unions, they have a car, they have a house, the husband and wife work, they earn a living, they can go on vacation. In the South, you have a woman working half the time, 2 jobs. Sometimes the man can't find work. You know, he's lucky if his pickup truck is 20 years old, but he's independent. The language that you hear is he's independent. We're independent. You're independent to be as poor as you want to be because you don't organize. So that's and so in the article for
we have the
BB&T,
lowest rate of union
that's correct.
organization, and seemingly are proud of it.
And they're proud of it. And they work together every day. I don't get it. They work together and they take care of each other every day. But when it comes to that, they're proud and they're not going to be union. And the thing is, I looked at the history of it, and apparently we'd had a massacre when the unions tried to form in the South. There had been a massacre that occurred with thugs that were being hired, and that kind of turned everybody off. It put the fear of everybody. And apparently, if the jobs came from the North, and they were earning $15 an hour then in union jobs, and now this was agricultural, and the people who were earning $1 an hour were now going up to $7 an hour. The issue has been that we've stayed at $7 an hour. And recently I was up in Massamoka in Massachusetts, and I saw a film on the worker. And in Tijuana, everyone thinks the jobs are going to Mexico. The mayor was complaining because of the empty boxes that the corporations had left behind. So now we went from the north to the south. Tijuana is now empty, so you don't really have to worry about the Mexicans, because now it's gone global. Now it's not a matter of...
They're setting up to break that wall.
That's
Yes,
right. But now it's not a matter of paying somebody $7 an hour. Where are we going to get 65 cents an hour? That's what people are being paid in those places. And the mayor of Tijuana was complaining, saying that, and these were documentaries that were done, that as soon as the people began to ask for an increase in their wage rights, that their water not be polluted because all this stuff that was coming out of the factories was going into their village and town, that's when the companies picked up and left.
You don't have to go as far as Tijuana to see that.
Well, they did it here.
We've been in Goldsboro, and
They did it here.
In Goldsboro, they got in Mount Olive, they got the plants and the chicken and the pickles and this, and so, as you know, two decades ago, they started bringing in a lot of Latino folks here to work in those plants. Then, they're working here for a while, they make a little progress, they start demanding maybe I'll actually pay overtime, which you're supposed to. And so they say, well, this is not any good. So they go to Haiti. They have the earthquake over in Haiti. They think, oh, this is great. Now we've got a new group to turn to. So there's a big Haitian community now in Mount Olive, and apparently they don't cause the problems that the old Latino community has been causing. So we see that even here. Let me end with this, which is something that several of you brought up. It's a crushing kind of structural problem in North Carolina. That even good-hearted people, hard to deal with. That is, I've interviewed a bunch of folks particularly from the Triad. Okay, so these would be folks from Hickory and from High Point and from Greensboro and from Winston-Salem, and they're something very consistent with what you described. That is, they say, okay, I'm 54 years old. I worked in furniture manufacturing for 30 years. I started working in this plant in High Point or Hickory when I was 17 years old. I didn't finish high school. I did the same thing my daddy did, and my uncle did, and my granddaddy did. It wasn't stupid. It made sense. And it did make sense at the time. And then they closed down the place and moved it to Indonesia, where they're going to move it. And I haven't been able to work decent since. Now, what they tell me is, you need to train for this high-tech job. I didn't finish high school. Then they tell me to go to community. I can't go to community college. I'm 55 years old. And what they'll say is, if one more governor, Democrat or Republican, brings in Google 8 and tells me it's the answer to my problems, I'm going to get my shot. Because I can't do anything with Google 8. So what is North Carolina's economic plan for me? They would say. And what he would say is, it's for me to die. My son, who is going to go to school, has gone to school, and maybe he can work for Google. He can go to community college. What's the plan for me? They're not. That has a massive structural problem on that front. So that it was a great wound to me when we did the stimulus packages and stuff. That what I was hoping for then, I thought these kind of guys, they could work construction, they'd love to, even if it wasn't what they were doing. This guy, I said, okay, so he's 56 years old. He can't work. I mean, he can work as a greeter at Walmart, and he's doing it. But what he would say is, I hate not being able to work. I hate it every day. I'm embarrassed vis-a-vis my family and my kids. I feel like I'm not a man because I can't work. But I wasn't stupid in what I did. You know, I worked like everybody in my family did. I'm a good worker. Everybody told me I was a good worker. But there's no hope for me. And so, you know, at least all kinds of other difficulties. So the notion that we can just ignore these problems and that way we're going to come out on top, it seems to me, just can't be. Let me stop at that, and let me particularly congratulate you folks for doing this great work here. Thanks for coming out on